sitting here in Omanus. Nick Morgan is the CEO of Opportunity Private Capital. Opportunity of Private Capital, a company that raise finance on property developments here in the Western Cape. We've just spent 2 days at the Business Conference and we've seen everything political. We've got an election that's coming up in 74 days and everybody's saying what's going to happen to South Africa Pty Limited. First of all, Nick, welcome. It's great having you here again. Maybe just give us, first of all, your thoughts on the last couple of days, just from a political perspective, because it does have an impact on business, property, and everything else. Just give me your thoughts of how you think the last couple of
morning,
days.
Neale. So, a couple of questions that some people have asked is, we're at the Business Conference. There are a lot of political speakers. Nick, are you that interested in politics? And my answer is very simple. It says any business owner in this country has to have a vested interest in politics because it affects your business, it affects your livelihood, it affects your strategy, it affects your outlook. So yeah, it's imperative that we're here. So to answer your question, it was very insightful. We had all the leaders of the opposition, the main leaders of the opposition. We had John Steenhuisen, we had Musi Mamane, we had who else was there? We had Gate McKenzie, Mr. Schlabisa from the IFP, Connie Mulder from the Freedom Front Plus. So there were quite a lot of diverse views that we heard, and it was interesting to hear their different perspectives on how they could change this country or what they were going to do to change this country. So wonderful insights from them, and then really good insights which you can go into from various, let's call it political strategists or global financial strategists that we've heard as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. I must say I feel largely more positive. Actually meeting them and actually hearing what they've got to say and what the alternatives are. And I just think that the greater South Africa doesn't know everything. We don't get exposed to everything. So we had this opportunity now to get exposed to all these different politicians, and as you quite rightly said, we don't really want to get involved. We run businesses, we're in property, but it does have an impact and it's pivotal to this economy moving. But any sort of highlights that came out, I mean, you mentioned all the names of all, from the DA and everything, that sort of came out to you, that sort of just comes to mind, maybe just from a political perspective.
Well, I think one must look at it from this point of view is all the political leaders are going to look at it from their own party's perspective. So one has to understand where their comments and their alignments come from. For me, and when you look at politicians, obviously they're going to look at it and try and expose a perspective that suits their narrative.
Sure.
If you want to put
absolutely,
it that way.
Yeah.
Now, the crux of it is this. There was a gentleman called Dr. Frans Cronje, who's a very informed strategist, incredibly smart man.
And interesting, he's having breakfast in the room next to us now in the same hotel.
He's got to say hi.
Yeah.
And France has been at the forefront of looking at South Africa Inc. as a whole over the last 15, 20 years probably. And his outlook for the last 15 years, according to him, has been pretty bleak. And suddenly, his everything that he looks at has turned, and he's actually seeing a positive outlook for South Africa. Now, we don't have time to go into detail here, but this is the guy who with his think tank are very informed about what's going on. Certainly a lot more informed than you and I are.
Absolutely.
And he came out with some very pertinent points as to why he feels that there's a positive outlook for South Africa over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And that for me is the highlight. One thing that, as a Cape Townian and someone who has businesses in the Cape, is one of the highlights that I found was that he explicitly mentioned that the Cape area was going to be a new emerging economy of Africa. And you and I have been talking about that for a while, but to hear it from someone who's in that cauldron was really comforting to hear. So, and then the political guys, going back to them, their vantage points, you know, they've all got charisma. I think they all spoke from the heart. I think their hearts were in the right place. I think from that point of view, we're in good hands from an opposition party point of view. And the thing that gave me some comfort is that they all seem to have strategies to combat any maleficence or any nefarious activities that might come out of the certain, let's call it, negative political agendas. So that gave me some comfort as well, because that's not stuff that we know about.
No, absolutely,
you know,
absolutely.
We don't get to hear about their fallback options or what they're planning in the background in order to combat these things. So for you and I, that was particularly insightful.
It was. So let's move away from the political side, because also they had various investors specifically focusing more on shares and stocks and that kind of stuff. And I think certainly what was very evident to me, this is not the place to learn about property. You come to real estate investor to learn about property. But definitely there's a certain bias towards, you know, getting stocks, you know, getting bonds and all this kind of stuff. And there's very knowledgeable people. They know their game. There's no two ways about it in terms of that. But it's interesting how the narrative and how they talk about real estate from a non-real estate person, because either you're a real estate person or you're not a real estate person. I just say it's one of the two. And you would obviously lean towards one or the other. But it's also an opportunity, I think, at some stage to have a great debate. But your thoughts, I mean, just in terms of, you know, some of the investor type approaches, I mean, we were also exposed to the likes of businessmen like Sean Summers. I mean, this morning we've seen Christo Visa. You know, these guys are titans in the game of business and also real estate themselves, particularly Christo Visa. Let's move into that. So just your thoughts just on investing per se, and then let's move into the property narrative, and then we can talk a little bit about OPC as well.
Okay, I'm going to go back. So you've mentioned a few things, so let me try and unpack it. I want to go back to Sean Summers, who I didn't mention.
Yes.
Sean Summers was the very well-known ex-CEO of Pick n Pay, who took it to great heights back in the 90s and 2000s, and he's come back after 17 years. He's come back as a CEO of Pick n Pay.
Yeah.
And he had a one-on-one interview with Alec Hogg, which was incredible actually. The fact that he's come back at the age of in his early 70s to come and run that juggernaut, I think is an exhibition of his faith in this country, how he sees the people that he has under his stewardship. He had some great insights to us as to how the captains of industry can move this country forward by having impact on the people and the tens of thousands of people that they work for. So to have a guy like that come in, let's call it out of the cold, back into the mix, shows me that the guys are positive about doing something about this country.
Absolutely, I think it was the highlight actually of the business sector presentation so far.
Yeah, it was incredible. He was incredible.
Yeah.
But then going back to the investment, so we got to listen to some of the top, let's call it, value investors.
Yes.
The guys
Pick
who run really big portfolios. Petersen, Cy Jacobs, Magnus Haystack was there as well.
Yeah, top of the game in that area.
Yeah. And I'll take, you know, I'm in the real estate game. I haven't been in the share game for a couple of decades now. But what they said is pertinent to all of us in this country. And let me role play a bit. Pete spoke about how South African stocks, especially the smaller cap stocks, are slightly undervalued. Actually, very undervalued. Slightly is not giving him credit.
There's a sale on.
Very undervalued.
There's a sale.
His business is value investing, so he's looking for those value stocks, and he thinks that we've got some great companies in this country whose value is not there because of the political climate, etc. And he sees that now, hopefully, going to unfold in a positive way going forward. Interesting enough, Cy Jacobs is also in that space. He's more, his proclivity is more to the American market, although they have obviously got offshore, but certainly with a bias towards America. They obviously have exposure to the South African market, but what he said is that he thinks that the next few months they're going to go for a couple of the South African stocks because he also thinks they're undervalued at the moment, that SA Inc. is undervalued, and that there's some positivity is going to come out of these elections, and they're hedging their bets on the fact that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And these guys have analysts all over the world who give them information. So to hear them come forward with this kind of information is very comforting. So it doesn't matter whether you're in shares, doesn't matter whether you're in real estate, doesn't matter whether you're selling cars, I suppose, for that matter. But the point is, there seems to be a positivity about the threshold that this election is going to bring in terms of the future of the country. Yeah.
Interesting point. I think, listening to both Pitt and to Sai, they had a difference of opinion on property in particular. So on the one hand, Pitt actually said, well, Calgro M3, which is obviously a low-cost housing company, very successful, run by Vickers and his team, and they're a very able team. And I mean, they're in the kind of the sweet spot of property development of low-cost housing.
Yeah.
But in terms of how the justification for buying shares, you can see it needs a little bit more depth. We property guys, we understand the longer term game a little bit more. And Pitt then added that, well, property is not a good investment to rent out and to hold, of which side disagreed. And he said, no, I disagree with it. So there's not all agreement in that particular sector. So I just want to bring up the whole property narrative now, talk a little bit about that.
Look, they're certainly going to have an arm wrestle over a beer at some stage, there's no question about it. So Pitt was very interesting. So he's quite bullish on let's call it one of the big development companies in the country, listed companies, because they are able to extract the value out of developing and then sell on that value to the market. And he thinks they've got a very good business model from that point of view. So they're in and then they're out and off they go. So he's incredibly bullish about, in particular, Calgro M3, but I think he's got his eye on a couple of other listed companies as well, possibly. Sai, on the other hand, Pitt is not an advocate of the long-term property hold.
No.
Sai, on the other hand, very knowledgeable guy. He is an advocate. Well, not sure he's an advocate, but he's made some very good trades on the REITs in South Africa of late. Coming off a low base naturally after COVID, the office space, the retail space took quite a hammering. But he saw that as an opportunity, and they've done really well on let's call it the comeback into the market from those REITs that were really battling at one stage. So I think that the takeaway to me is that one has to look at specific aspects of any market because there's value there if you can find it. Some people would just blanket REITs saying we're not going to touch REITs any longer because they plummeted during COVID and that's it, that game is over. But there's value there if you can find it.
No,
if you're willing to look for it, there's value there. Same with Pitt, with the developing side, that's it. Calgro, they develop properties, they extract value out of the land, there's value there, and in various other channels as well. So that for me is the trick of investing, is finding companies that have got a niche in certain sectors and they're able to extract the value out of those niches.
Well, on that note, Nick, let's talk about Opportunity Private Capital, your business. I mean, you know how to extract value as well. So, I mean, you're offering returns of 15% for capital investments. Tell us a little bit about that, how you're extracting value, because I think that's very important in the context of this conversation.
So, interestingly enough, so we mirror really what Peter did, his model, whereas our investors come in to help fund the projects that we do, and the projects that our development company are involved in, and that is extracting value. So greenfield land, it's worth something, but then it's the development of that land that really pulls out the value, and that's where the investors benefit. That's where we benefit as well. So that worked. I suppose that OPC does exactly what that is. We bring in investors, give them the opportunity to go into projects that have got a certain amount of value potential in them, and then with a great team behind us and various affiliates, we're able to extract that value and investors have done really well. So, I mean, you asked the question. I didn't expect to be talking about OPC.
No.
But, you know, just over the last 5 years, our average returns to investors are just under 15.5% per annum. So I think we can hold our heads up high that we can rival some of those big companies who are extracting great value as well.
Wonderful. So just in closing, you know, I must say I'm feeling much more encouraged. I'm much more positive. And in terms of the selection, and I think it's going to be interesting. It's going to be pivotal. I mean, obviously there's two sides I'm leaning towards, and I'm looking at the players that we saw. I'm excited. I'm excited about business. I'm excited about property, about real estate. I think the market's going to turn, and when it turns, it's really going to go. What are your thoughts, your final thoughts on that?
Final thoughts? Even more positive. There is going to potentially be some turmoil around the elections and potentially shortly after that, depending on what the results are, but it's going to be short-lived. I think the general consensus is that over the next 5 to 10 years, we're in a good space in the country, and if I may say so, especially the Cape. There's a lot of positivity about this as an investment environment and around the political environment here as well.
Fantastic. Nick Morgan, CEO of Opportunity Private Capital. It's wonderful chatting to you as normal, and I look forward to going forward. And thank you all for tuning in again and successful investing to you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neale. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Right. Awesome. It was cool.